Hey guys, Ronnie here with a very spooky alien abduction tutorial. Before I jump in, there's a few things I need to touch on. The first being micro displacement. If you don't know, micro displacement is basically a subdivision system where things closer to the camera are subdivided more and they have more detail, and things further from the camera have less detail. And then you apply a displacement map and it works accordingly. As of Blender 2.78, you need to be in the experimental feature set, very spooky. So that's the first thing you need to do is make sure you're in experimental. So we'll touch a little bit more on a few other little tweaks we'll have to make, but the first most important thing is you need experimental on because you will not get a lot of these options that I'll have. The second thing I'd like to touch on are greebles. What are greebles, you might ask? In the 3D sense, a greeble is a displacement map that applies, of course, detail. And this will be the kind of detail that you'll see in the Star Wars movies or the Alien movies or really any sort of space movie. So here's basically what we will be working with, blank cube. And then after the map is applied, this is kind of what you get. So you can really get a lot of intricate detail on a very simple mesh. And then working with the micro displacement system, you save a lot of processing time because closer to the camera you'll get more detail, and further back you'll get less. You do not need micro displacement for this to work, but it really helps. It speeds up render times and you get better results. For the sake of this tutorial, I'll be using a greeble texture that I found online, and I will be linking it in the description. It's also the texture that I used in my final image that you saw. So let's get started. Let's get rid of the default cube, and we're going to add in a torus. And I'm just going to scale that up by 4. And this will be the basis of the spaceship. So let's apply a material and call it something like ship. And so this is an important step. You need to go into settings for the material and click true for displacement. After that, we will add a subdivision surface, and you might notice this looks a little different if you've never used micro displacement before because you have new options. So we're going to select adaptive, and I'll keep the levels at 1, and that's basically it as far as the micro displacement goes. I'm not going to get too much into micro displacement. There's a ton of amazing tutorials on it. So if anything comes up that I feel needs to be mentioned, I will, but I'm not going to get in depth as to how this is working. So I'm going to move the camera. I'll move it out, and then I will move it down. I want to basically get underneath the spaceship in a way. So I'm going to press Shift and F, which will put me into like this third-person camera view, and just kind of get underneath it and point up, and I like that. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm using a smaller camera than I did for my final renders. I'm just using 50% of 1024. An important note of micro displacement is it is affected by your resolution size. So the higher the resolution, the more detail you'll get. And if you try and make it too big, your scene will not render. Your GPU won't have enough RAM. So you're really bottlenecked by your amount of RAM that you have on your GPU. But just for a quick tutorial, for my personal rendering times, I'm using this. I would recommend going as high as you can for your scene and for what your computer can support, because you'll get better results. So we've got this. Let's apply our image texture. So I'm going to plug in my greeble map. And I'm just going to plug it into the diffuse for now, just to see what it looks like. So right now, we're not really seeing anything. I'm going to open the UV editor. And I'm going to go into edit mode on this torus. And you'll see there's already something selected. So we're going to press U and then follow active quads, which will map it out for you. And then I'm just going to select all this and divide it by 2, or scale it down by 2. So this is basically the map we're going to be applying. So I'm going to unplug it from diffuse, and I'm going to plug it into displacement. And I'm going to select non-color data. So you'll kind of see you're already getting some detail there. I'm just going to keep the diffuse plugged in for now because we want to make sure the displacement works. And let's give this a render and see what it looks like. It's important to note when you go into rendered view, it will look different than when you actually render. That can be adjusted in the properties right here. If you go down to geometry, the preview is set to 8 pixels, the render is set to 1. So if you set your preview to even 1, you will get the same results that you're getting here. So that's just a heads up that it won't look exactly the same. See, if we go into rendered, it's kind of chunky. So yeah, just keep that in mind. So this is looking good. I mean, that's for the mesh we have, that's really impressive. So I'm just gonna hit smooth on this, and I'm going to work on a little bit of a material. I'm not gonna get super in depth with this, but the general process I would do would be an image texture, plug it into glossy node, and then a mix shader. So plug that in, and then I'm gonna use a steel texture for this, and I'm gonna set the roughness to about 0.4. You can use PBR materials. I'm just using this simple setup just for my own rendering times. So then I would add a diffuse shader and another image texture of dirt. So there we go. Plug that in. And let's see what we're looking at here. So I'm going to add some UV maps. This first one we'll name displacement because that's what's doing the displacement on here. I'm going to add another one and call it color. We're going to add some UV maps to the scene. So let's add our displacement here, plug it into the displacement. What this is doing is this will allow us to edit the sizing of the color textures basically and leave the displacement alone. Because if you don't do that, you're just going to be editing, you're going to be scaling everything, and you don't want to do that because we like how our displacement is set up. So I'm going to add a UV map again, call it color, and plug it into the images for the diffuse and the glossy texture. And so now when you select color, we could move that, but the displacement stays the same, and that's really important for this kind of scene. So I'm going to scale these both just down. That looks good. Now we don't want it mixing evenly. I'm going to add a grunge mask, and I'm going to use a mask I downloaded off of Polygon, everyone's favorite texture website. You can get a free trial if you can't afford it. Just download a bunch of stuff. You're limited how many downloads per day, but if you keep up on it, you can really grab a lot off of there. So here's an alpha mask. I'm just going to plug that in. Going to add a new UV map and call it grunge. Copy that, select grunge. And don't like how I'm going to switch these so that we have more of the metal with dirt on top. So I'm going to edit the grunge texture. This is just mixing between the dirt and the metal. So let's see how that looks. For the sake of the tutorial, that's good enough for me. I'm happy with that. It doesn't look overly bad, so we'll be moving on. First thing, I'm going to make the world black, which isn't as depressing as it sounds. I'm just going to go into I have an HDR setup. I'm going to set the strength to 0. If you don't have an HDR setup, you can just go into noise, texture, Voronoi texture, anything really, set the strength to 0, just so you get this black world. And of course, now we cannot see the spaceship. So I'm going to add in a sun lamp. I'm going to basically kind of make it similar to the camera so that we get some good shadows there and it doesn't look weird from our camera angle. So that looks good to me. I might turn it down a little bit, maybe 0.5. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, that's good. All right, so we're going to add in that inner light band that I had. So you're going to select the torus, and you're just going to select this innermost ring, and I'm going to turn proportional editing on. And I'm going to scale it, and I'm going to exclude the z-axis. So I'm going to hold, after I press S, I'm going to hold Shift and Z. Scale it in a bit, like something like that. Looks good. Okay, and then I'm going to add another torus. And I'm going to scale that out about like so. And then I'm going to go to edit mode and press Alt and S. And this scales along the faces. So we can kind of make it smaller so it's not this fat ring. Then I'm going to scale on the Z-axis. I'm going to turn off proportional editing. And I'm going to scale it out again. And that looks okay. But you'll notice now if we go into rendered view, it's kind of getting cut into by the spaceship. So I'm going to just, again, press S and then Shift and Z so we're not scaling on the Z axis. Just kind of move it out a little bit. So I'm going to render that little section and see what it looks like and make sure that nothing is clipping into it. Okay, so far so good. I'm going to apply smooth shading. We're going to add our material. Let's call it ring. And likewise, I will call this the mesh ring. And let's call the ship mesh ship 01 because there'll be more ship parts. So I'm going to head back to my ring. Get rid of the diffuse and add in an emission shader and a black body node. And a black body node colors based on temperature in case you don't know. So this is great for like light bulbs and stuff. I'm going to do a value of 12,000 because I think it's like a cool blue, like whitish blue. It's really artificial looking. So I will render this again just to see if we're getting clipped into or not. If we are, which I think that's okay. If you still were, again, just scale it and make sure you're not scaling on the Z-axis and just pull it out a little bit more. So I'm happy with that. So let's add in the circle or the sphere part of the spaceship. And we're not going to add a sphere. We're going to add a cube because we want it to have quads. I'm going to just hold Control and 2 to apply a subdivision surface that I'm just going to hit apply. So we're not that wasn't a micro displacement thing. That was just subdividing it so that we get like a sphere made of quads. I'm going to hit Control and 2 again to add another subdivision surface. This time this will be micro displacement. So I'll check adaptive and put my view level to 1. That's basically just how much it gets subdivided. You don't need anything too much. And again, it will eat up your GPU, so be careful with that. Don't go crazy. And I'm going to apply the same ship texture. You're free to make more textures, or more materials. Just make sure that you go into settings and displacement, set it to true, because it won't work otherwise. So let's head into material view. And we're going to have to add in the same UVs we did on the ship. So I'll add 3 right off the bat. Actually, no. I'll get rid of these 2. Just have the 1. And select the whole thing, and then make sure you have something else like selected like that. And then U, follow active quads. Head into material. Oh, we are in material view. And name it displacement. It is cap sensitive, so make sure it's exactly the same way as you spelled it before. There we go. And I'm going to scale this down. I'm just going to scale it down by 2, scale it down by 2. That's good. And now I'm going to add in our other maps. Let's pull this out. So we've got color. And we can edit this a little bit. And then we've got grunge. And I'm fine with that. So that's it for that. I'm going to apply smooth shading. And let's give that a render and see what it looks like. All right, looks fine to me. You can see some detail on it. So now I'm going to add the entrance to the beam that comes down. So to do that, you're just going to add a cylinder, go into edit mode. And I'm just going to select both of the faces in wireframe view and just delete only faces because we don't need the faces on them, at least on the top and the bottom. So now I'm going to scale this down on the excluding the Z-axis, and now scale it down on the Z-axis. Move it down here, and you just want to get it to the size that you want. So that looks good to me. So I'm going to go into edit mode. I'm going to press Control and R to add a few edge loops, and that's fine, just to give it some more geometry to work with. Again, we're going to apply the ship material. And then we're going to UV unwrap this, but we have to do it the old school way. So you can't just follow active quads. At least I never got that to work right. So I'm just going to mark the seam on there, mark the seam up there, select that seam, mark it. All right. So unwrap. And now let's set up our displacement material. our displacement map. And that looks good off the bat to me. So I'm going to add in the other two, color and grunge. And again, make sure when you're editing the UVs to each one, you're selecting it in the UV map. So color. I should mention there are ways to get it so that you don't see the pattern as strongly in the Greeble, but I actually kind of like it, so I didn't bother with that. But in the forum thread I'll be linking to in the description, people talk about how to get it to be not so repetitive. So, okay, that looks good. And make sure you apply your subdivision surface, adaptive, view level 1. So let's give this a render and see how it looks. All right, so that looks pretty good to me. Now I'm going to add in the beam. So I'm just going to add in another cylinder, scale it excluding the z-axis, and I'm just going to make sure that it resides inside of the outer ring here, because obviously it has to be inside of it. Oh, and also on the cylinder part of the ship, I'm going to hit smooth shading. I'm going to name these real quick. Let's call this ship 02 and ship 03, just to keep things organized. Okay, so back to the beam. I'm going to name this beam. Going to top-down view, wireframe view. Again, I'm going to get rid of the outermost faces, like on the top and bottom. All right, so let's bring this down. I'm going to apply smooth shading. And make sure it starts inside of the ship. And I'm going to go into edit mode. And I'm going to select the bottom. And you want to make sure that the entire beam goes past the camera view. Because if you had it like this, right now you don't see it. But once we apply our material, you'll clearly see that it starts there. So you don't want that. You want it to go underneath like that. So we're also going to UV unwrap this. So I'm going to select this bottom part, mark seam, select the top part, mark seam. Then you can really select any part here and then mark seam, and then I'm going to select the whole thing while still in edit mode, rotate it on the z-axis, and I'm going to move that seam so that I can't see it. And that doesn't mean so that it's in the back, it has to be on the side, because once we apply our material, you don't want people to see where the texture starts and ends. So right there is good, because if you put it on the back, you would still see through the beam and see where it starts, and that would not look good. So yeah, just put it on the side the best you can. And we're going to apply our material. We're going to base it off of the ring, so I'm going to just select ring, and then press this little plus, so we'll have ring 0.001. So now we have a new material that's basically a copy of the original ring. I'll call it beam. And I'm going to move this to a new layer so we can just see it without having to render everything else. I'll go into rendered view. So this is what we have so far. I'm going to add a transparent node and a mix shader. And plug that in. Then I'm going to add in a Voronoi texture. You can add any kind of texture you want for this. It doesn't have to be a Voronoi texture. But like that, you'll see it's going to be stretched, but remember that we UV unwrapped it. So make sure that you fully unwrapped it, and then you can add in a texture coordinate. Plug the UV into the vector of your texture, and now it's using our UV map. So we have a lot of control over it now. So I'm going to do something maybe like that. For my render, I use cells. I'm just going to use intensity just for something new. I'm going to turn the emission down to about 0.8 looks good. So now I'm going to view it with the whole scene. And you want to make sure these are kind of similar. This can be, for me, was brighter, so that's fine. But you don't want this to be too low. So that's really all the modeling, guys. Next is the sky. The stars in the background. I just added a plane, rotate it on the x-axis, and pull it back behind the ship. And then go to your camera and just scale it up so that it encompasses the whole scene. And I'm going to call this sky. Add a new material, call it sky. Going to add in a transparent, get rid of this diffuse. and add in an emission. I'm going to add a mix shader. Plug them both in. Plug that in here. So let's move the sky to another layer. Okay, so that's what we would expect to see. I'm going to add in a noise texture. Plug the noise texture in, and we're starting to get an interesting pattern here. I'm going to put the scale up to 400 because the idea here is just to get like dots. So that's kind of what we want. We're going to add in a color node, or sorry, a color ramp, and then turn it down. And as you turn it down, you will see the transparent starts to take over, and you get less and less dots. So add as many or as few stars as you want. I think this looks good. And you want to up the emission on this because we're going to be adding fog and you really want this to cut through the scene. So yeah, that looks good to me. So next up is the human. For the human, I used a completely free program called Make Human. And this is what the default will look like. So in the modeling tab, you can edit if it's a man or a woman. It doesn't really matter. You won't really see the detail in the scene, so I'll just keep it at the middle gender. The main thing you want to do is head over to pose/animate and apply a rig or a skeleton to it. And just the simplest you can get, really the better. You don't need a face rig here because you're not going to be changing the face. So just something like this is fine. And you're going to go to Files, Export, and then tell it to where you want to export. We're going to export it as a collada. So we're back in our scene. I'm going to go to a new layer. I'm going to go to File. And I'm going to import the collada that we just exported. So here's our human. It's just the basic mesh. I didn't edit it at all in Make Human, and that's not really necessary. I called mine Abducted Tut. So I'm going to click on the base mesh, and you have the default skin material. I'm going to press Use Nodes. I'm going to change the diffuse to just black. And then I'm going to select the eyes and change the material to the default skin. So you want this all to be black. And then after that, you're going to select both of these meshes, and you're going to unclick the little cursor so that you cannot select it anymore. Now we're selecting the rig, which is what we want to be. You do not want to be editing the mesh. If you've never worked with armatures before, you do not want to be editing the mesh. You're simply going to be editing the armature. So yeah, make sure you do not accidentally select those, so just turn them off right there. So in object mode, selecting the skeleton, I'm going to press RZ90. I'm just going to basically get it oriented how I want. So I'm going to rotate it by 180 again because I want it to be this way. It's just a preference. I'm going to head over to the armature tab here, and I'm going to go into wireframe view. I'm going to select, let's go with stick. Or envelope is probably better. It makes it easier to see. So I'm still in object mode. I'm going to press R and then Y and then 90. So now it's laying down. I'm going to move. I'm basically going to put like the center of mass like towards where you think it would be, like in the center of the grid here. And I'm in front ortho view, by the way. So something like that. And now I'm just going to go into pose mode, and I'm going to select the knees, bend them down like so. I'm going to select the hips here, bend them down. And then I'm going to get out of this side view, or rather the front view, and I'm going to select just one of the legs. And I'm going to kind of move it out so you get like this 3D perspective here. It's not like you can see both legs from the side view. So something like that. And then I'm going to select each foot, bend them down, just kind of make the person look weightless. And you don't have to worry about stretching here. People aren't going to see it. So now I'm going to select the arms. Same process as the legs, just kind of move them back. Just select one arm, like so. Again, you're just trying to make the person look as weightless as possible. And then you could even select the spine here and move it back maybe, and then adjust the arms accordingly. And then move the head back. Okay, that's good enough. So I'm going to head back into object mode. And I'm going to bring the rest of our scene in. And we'll have to scale the character now. So scaling the character is really important because it defines the size of the scene. So the smaller the character, the bigger the ship. But the smaller the character, the less likely the viewer is to notice it. Which maybe that's your intention. But this is, it's something that really took thought on my end. Of course, it has to fit in the beam, but, again, this makes a huge ship. I went more for visibility. So the ship doesn't seem super huge, but it's still a decent size. So I'm going to move it down, move the human down. And the reason we made the human black is we're not going to put it inside of the beam. Because let's see what that looks like. You don't really see him. So the workaround for that is just to move the human in front of the beam. Because I tried having realistic skin and stuff on the human and you just didn't see it. So if you move it in front of the beam, then it really stands out and you really know what's going on here, which was important for me at least. So I'll just center the human a bit. Okay, and then the last thing we have to do is add in fog to the scene. So I'm going to add in a cube, name it volume, add a material, call it volume, get rid of the diffuse. Now, I really played around with this a lot. So I'm going to show you two different options you have. You can just plug in one volume scatter and go to 0.01 or something, which will give you decent fog. What I did was I mixed a few volume scatters, so I'm not really going to go into what each one is kind of doing, because it was really just down to a lot of trial and error, which took forever, but I had another one of about 0.005, and I added them with a mix shader, and I mixed it via Voronoi texture. Intensity, I plugged in the factor, had intensity of about 4, then another mix shader, and another volume set to density of 0. And there's probably a better way to do this, quite honestly. This is just the way that I did it. As is true of anything in any tutorial. So I set the scales, I think, to 36. I plugged it in here. So really, you're just having different intensities of fog. So I'll render out both of just one scatter volume or one volume scatter, and then of this whole node network here, and show you the differences. So before you hit render, you'll really want to make sure that this cube encompasses the whole scene. So then head in here and see, we don't want to see this cube within the camera. So just keep scaling it up. Or actually, we can probably just move it up a bit. Yeah, and then okay, so that's fine. So I'll hit render on both of these node setups, and we'll go over it. Okay, and here we are with, this is the just one volume scatter render, and it took about 30 seconds. And then here is the node network render, which unfortunately didn't come off the greatest here. You can see it in my final image just fine. You can kind of see here compared to the other one that you are getting some differences in volume. So I am quite disappointed with how this turned out, but again, if you just look at my final render, you will see the difference that it can make. This took 12 minutes, so 30 seconds compared to 12 minutes. Yeah, once again, I'm really disappointed with how this turned out, but you get the idea. I think it looks better when you have differences in volume. It just makes it more interesting to look at and less kind of flat than this is. So now we're going to hop over to the compositor. And I really didn't do too much to this. I know I added a glare with fog glow, and I set the threshold to, let's see, about 0.4. That might be too strong. Let's go 0.6. Yeah, something like that. just to kind of accentuate the glow here. And then some lens distortion. And I'll set the distortion to about 0.02 and then click fit. And then dispersion, let's try 0.01. And that looks okay. It's not too strong, but it's still kind of noticeable, which I like. So yeah, guys, that's about it. That's all I really did in Blender. After that, I put it in GIMP for some like chromatic aberration and whatnot, as far as like separating the channels and stuff like that. Added like a vignette and stuff. But yeah, I mean, that's the gist of it. I would love to see what anybody comes up with. I hope you guys learned a lot, and thank you for watching.